Good morning, everyone. Am I on? Yes, I am. I want to talk about the ethical cloud today, probably something that isn't typically talked about at a cloud conference, but something that matters to me, and I felt that should be talked about today. So I'm Rob. I work at Lush. Lush didn't put me up to this talk today. I did this of my own volition. I had to ask if I could come and do it today. Full disclosure, I previously worked at a large commodities giant. I haven't always worked at Lush, and I think that's part of the reason now I now work at Lush. I want the small impact that I will have on the planet to be a positive one. And I'm not an authority on this stuff. I did all of my research ahead of time. I didn't know anything about the ethical aspects of cloud computing before I started this, and what better way to learn than to stand in front of some domain experts and try to seem credible. So there's three parts to my talk. There's the environment, data privacy aspects of cloud computing, and the human cost of cloud computing. So I'm just going to dive straight in with the environment. Who's here is in the cloud already? Hands up. So probably about 80%. Okay, keep your hands up if you know how much of your cloud provider's data energy is renewable. Okay, cool. That's no one. No one knows as a rough percentage how much of their cloud provider's data energy is renewable. From Greenpeace, the internet is likely to be the biggest thing we create as a species. So if we get it right, we'll get it right. If we get it wrong, and we're not using renewable energy, or we're treating people badly, it's going to be a disaster. And the problem's getting bigger. In 2019, cloud spending is going to be around $200 billion. And in 2022, it's going to be around 1.3 trillion. So it's a six-fold increase in the amount of cloud spending. And cloud is currently 3% of our global power consumption. And it generates as much emissions as the aviation industry, which is huge. It's 100 billion kilowatt hours used by data centers a year. And 30 to 40% of that is just on data center cooling. Now, Google did a really interesting thing. Urs Holtz raised the temperature in Google's data centers, not by a massive amount, but saved a huge amount of money. And obviously, the output of that in kilowatt hours for cooling dramatically reduced. And if our data centers aren't powered by 100%, our demands on dirty power will spiral out of control. And that's exactly what's happening in Virginia at the moment. So a large cloud provider, I'm not dropping names at all, have scaled up their operations in Virginia alone by 60% in the last 2 years. And Virginia is a massive hub for cloud computing. It's one of the major states with Richmond, et cetera. It's huge, and only 4% of their power is renewable. So I'd like to talk about how bad the problem is in Virginia. You'll see a couple of bit.ly links at the top of my slides here and there. Feel free to take pictures. It all starts with TEC, the ethical cloud. So that's one of the cloud providers, and that's a demand on additional fossil fuel infrastructure. So the Atlantic Coast Pipeline was built to get gas into Virginia. And that's us literally moving backwards instead of investing more in renewable energy sources. And they're 38th in the States for renewable energy. And that's not I wouldn't want to come 38th in a race for renewable energy. There are states in the surrounding area that are have a lot better access to renewable energy, like North Carolina, for example. So you can help your cloud. Within 3 major clouds, there are groups of people who are trying their best to enact change within their own clouds. So we've got the Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, Google's Workers for Action on Climate, and then Microsoft's Workers for Good. They all walked out on September the 20th in protest of the climate. It was a world strike, and they joined, but they need our help. They need big brands to communicate that they have big concerns with this. Another picture-worthy slide, if you want to get your phones out, this is the sustainability reports for the clouds. So this is their, if you like, their commitment to renewable energy. And if you look at those pages, there's one for Google, one for AWS, one for Azure, and it shows what they're doing in this space. And another one for cloud comparison for optimizations, what the clouds are doing to allow all of us to make better, more efficient use of our cloud infrastructure. Google, for example, have their recommendations engine that's going live soon that allows you that will monitor your estate. Unless you opt out, you can opt out if you want, but it will tell you where you can be more efficient. If you're over-provisioning your estate, it will tell you, and you can reduce your estate. What we're doing, So we're being picky. We're choosing our cloud provider. One of the main reasons we went with the cloud provider that we are now with was their commitment to 100% renewable energy by the end of 2017. We're asking our managed service providers to follow us. Now, we don't have any say there, but at least we're asking the questions. We're asking our managed service providers, hey, will you follow us over to this cloud that we believe is sustainable, is ethical? They might say no, and that's fine, but at least we're asking the question. We're thinking efficiency, so we reduced our production estate, and we're in the process of reducing our production estate by 30%, just because we want to minimize open provisioning, and obviously we're saving around 30% of our costs per month. And we're redesigning our website for efficiency. So we're using the best-in-class technologies for massive efficiency improvements to just reduce our estate furthermore. What can you do? So for non-cloud users, actually, it's better to be in the cloud because there are lots of efficiencies that you get for free by going into the cloud. The cloud virtualization is much better than you might be able to achieve in your own cloud, in your own on-prem infrastructure. So move into the cloud, consider it. If the environment isn't a big concern for you, at least allow it to be a side effect for you. For existing cloud users, call out your provider. Be picky. Look at your cloud, look at the other clouds, look where they're drawing their energy, look where their mindset is in terms of the planet and the planet we're going to have in the future. And lastly, managed service consumers, sorry. Speak to your consumers. They might tell you where to go. They might not be happy to move a cloud. It's a big undertaking. I know Lush have done it, and it was a big undertaking for us. But at least you've asked. The next part I'd like to talk about is data privacy. Hands up, who's familiar with the Fourth Amendment? Okay, probably, I'd say 5% of people. And that's the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Who's familiar with the third-party doctrine? Okay, one person. And this is the people who voluntarily give information to third parties such as banks, phone providers, internet service providers, and email servers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. And there's an example there. You'll be able to see the slides later, but there's 2 lawsuits that are centered around this. How about the Cloud Act? Who's familiar with the Cloud Act? One person again. And this is clarifying lawful overseas use of data. And this says, and this is scary, it allows federal law enforcement to compel US-based technology companies via warrant or subpoena to provide requested data on servers regardless of whether the data is stored in the US or not. And what that means is the only method to protect customer data is via an objection from a provider. So that's an internet service provider. There's no direct vehicle by which an individual can compel the government not to search their data. It's completely transparent to users. And the US courts can ask for the production of data in a foreign country, even if the laws in that country are violated by that request. So it's not a nice situation. And a nice quote from Benjamin Franklin: 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. And it's very true. But, I gotta laugh. HB 57, House Bill 57 in Utah, it says that a law enforcement agency may not obtain without search warrant issued by a court upon probable cause location stored on or transmitted mobile data transmitted to a remote data service provider. So that's us. That's the information on our customers transmitted to the cloud. But so far it's only Utah. And I don't know how, I've only gone so far down the rabbit hole with this, but I don't know how national security letters will affect that. And national security letters are terrifying. Okay, hands up again. Who relies on cloud provider data encryption at rest to protect their customer data? Okay, probably about 5%. I'd imagine you all do. Like, there is transparent data encryption at rest that you'll get from your cloud providers. And here's a comparison of that. This is the transparency reports into requests for information from the US government, from these cloud providers. So why I'm mentioning this, we try to keep our customer data to an absolute minimum. If we don't have to store information on a customer, we won't. If we store identifiable information on a customer, we allow that information to be stored on the customer's device. We don't store that ourselves because we don't need it. And we're asking questions. We don't know the legal minefield that is data privacy in and out. I don't think anyone probably does here. And neither did the cloud providers' lawyers in some cases, because it's such a maze. But we're asking questions. And we're considering domiciling sensitive data in countries with better data privacy laws, like Iceland, for example. That's known as the Switzerland of data. If the US government come to Iceland and ask for production of data on customers, they're more likely to say no. And we're looking at user-generated data encryption and key encryption keys. And I'll mention that in a second. So what can you do? Don't store what you don't need. If you can give your customers an amazing experience without storing all of their data, don't store all of their data. And understand the legal minefield. Speak to your cloud providers. Speak to your cloud providers' lawyers to understand more. They might not be able to give you all the answers because it is a minefield, but you might have more confidence in that. Be picky. Every cloud provider handles requests from the government slightly differently, and some are more willing to give up data from your customers to the government if asked. Some are more likely to fight it. And take the fight into your own hands. Use your own data encryption, key encryption keys, because even if the government do get your data, they'll still have to come back to you in order to decrypt it, and then you can fight it yourselves on behalf of your customers. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the human cost of cloud computing. Who's familiar with the 3 TGs? Show of hands? That's no one. Okay, so that's tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. They're all registered as conflict minerals, and a conflict mineral is a mineral whose mining proceeds fund wars. They're all used in data centers. 4.5 million people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo have been displaced because of conflict, and it's generated 800,000 people who are now seeking refuge in other countries to escape that conflict. 5.5 million people have died since 1998 because of conflict, mining of these minerals funds those conflicts. So it's our infrastructure that's going towards funding wars. And scarily, $24 trillion worth of resources are estimated to remain in the ground in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So that's a huge opportunity for mining still that, if not monitored carefully, isn't good for the people of the Congo. And taking a step forward, so we've done the mining, now we're doing the production, we're in the assembly line now. It's not good for people there either. So conditions aren't improving, and I did some research, and in 2019, people are still being exploited. So the permanent and temporary workers, there's a legal limit by how many temporary workers you can have as a percentage in Shenzhen. And that's being broken by big companies who are creating the products that we use all the time. And the working hours are the same. In one factory alone, I think people were working 4 hours overtime every day to keep up with our demands. And well-being, some more research. There's a very, very, very well-known person in response to a spate of suicides in a Shenzhen workshop said, this is within the national average of suicides. As people who produce and employ and look after people in these conditions, should we not be aspiring for better than the national average? Should we not be aspiring to give our people a happy and healthy working environment to work in? Post-production, so once something's been created, we've generated waste, e-waste in this case. 80% of e-waste is illegally traded or dumped. That's 50 million tons every year, or 126 Empire State Buildings if you want to kind of visualize it. That's a huge amount. And it's worth over $62 billion every year. Massive amounts. And there's the contamination as well. Where that e-waste is dumped, there's lead, mercury, beryllium leaching into the groundwater and killing people. And it's all because of our demand for internet and our mindset of discarding when we're done. But people are closing the loop. Apple in 2015 recycled 1 ton of gold from their devices. That's $40 million. And over 1,000 tons of copper, which was $6 million. It's a huge business, but we need to get into the habit of recycling. In 2020 Olympics, Japan will have recycled 30 kilograms of gold, 4 tons of silver, and 3 tons of bronze, worth a collective $3 million. Huge amounts of money. There's a website called eStewards who detail companies who are committed to not dumping their e-waste or exporting their e-waste to developing countries. So there's a lot of information on that website, and I'd recommend you look at it. What we're doing, we're trying to influence. We're trying to lead by example. We're trying to share our story with people, how we're going about this. We're trying to create transparency, or as much transparency as we can get through the production pipeline. We're going to see for ourselves. We're not relying, call us naive, we're not relying on the goodwill of large mining companies or large production houses. We're going to see for ourselves. We're asking questions. We're asking the kind of questions that no one's asked before. A response that we'll get from asking a question either on a production, typically on a production line is, we've never been asked this question before, we don't know how to answer it. And we're looking for partners. So I would urge you, if you're curious or want to know more, grab me after, because I'd love to talk with you about it. We'd love to partner up with you to see what we can do to make ethical changes. What can you do? So as cloud provider, as people who are already in the cloud, ask your providers what they're doing to improve this process. They're too wealthy to not be accountable for this. And pay people safely. If you're a hardware producer, pay them and pay them fairly, give them a safe working environment to work in, and other people will be forced to do the same. Hardware consumer. Sorry? Was that a question? No. Okay. Be picky with your hardware. You can opt to go for a mobile phone that's produced unethically, or you can opt to go for a phone that's produced more ethically, has the ability to be recycled instead of just discarded. And close the loop. So it's 13 times cheaper to extract minerals out of devices than it is to mine for new ones, and it generates 80% less emissions, which is huge. So billions of dollars worth of gold, I think it's over $7 billion worth of gold, are thrown away every year, and a ton of mobile phones contains more gold than a ton of gold ore. It's a huge business, and it's a huge opportunity for people who want to get into that space and start extracting minerals. So in closing, the internet is growing. There's about 4.5 billion users online today, and it's growing by about another million users every day. It's huge. And collectively, we spend about 1.2 billion years online every year. That's about 100 days per person per year. The world is warming, despite what people will have you believe. People are suffering, whether that's artisanal miners in the Democratic Republic of the Congo or people in assembly lines in China. People are really suffering because of our demand for internet. And be accountable. It's not just about securing the cheapest price. A lot of the talks here have been about optimizing, and obviously that's a huge consideration for everyone, but it's not just about the cheapest price. There's no higher power taking on your responsibility for this than you. Ultimately, we are all responsible for what happens next. And from the buying team at Lush, it's our job to know, and once we know, it's our responsibility to act. So if you remember one thing, remember that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Rob, you and I have had some big conversations about Lush over the past couple days. Can you share with the crowd what Lush is doing around how they think about revenue and what they contribute back to the world?
Yeah, of course. So Lush donate millions of pounds per year to charities, not-for-profits. And sometimes the amount that we give to charities, not-for-profits, far exceeds our net profits. And that's something that's never going to change. We believe in the right to make a profit for our business, but we also believe in the right to support others. And even if our profits are dwindling, the amount we give every year is never going to change, and that's something we're really proud of.
Right, and last year alone, it far exceeded the revenues, correct?
Yeah, it did, by about 20 times.
By 20 times?
Yeah.
I guess this is, when I was talking to Rob the other night at dinner, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm like, that should be on billboards. I don't know about you guys, I find that to be extremely commendable to work for an organization like that. And of course, your talk was about something kind of related. So I don't use bath bombs, but if you do, please go out to Lush and buy a bunch of it. I mean, seriously. So they have a really, really amazing team and some great people. So thanks, Rob, very much.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, buddy.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.